Hermione Granger and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 7 Mudbloods and Murmurs. Hermione finished the full week of classes strong. In addition to acing Lockhart's quiz in Defense Against the Dark Arts and changing the beetle into a button in Transfiguration, Hermione was able to repot 10 mandrakes and get full marks on a quiz on the International Warlock Convention of 1289 in History of Magic. In fact, she found the International Warlock Convention of 1289 so impressive that she was able to convince Professor Binns to assign her extra work so she could learn more. Hermione looked forward to spending some time in the Hogwarts library over the weekend. It had been wonderful catching up with Ron, Harry, Neville, and Parvati throughout the week between classes and homework. Hermione even got a chance to play a game of wizard's chess with Ron. Ron was one of the best chess players she had ever encountered. Hermione had been practicing with Bert over the summer months, but Ron still beat her over and over again. Wizard's chess and Muggle's chess were basically the same, except the magic pieces of the wizard's chess set moved by themselves and fought each other. On Friday, after classes were over for the week, she and Ron sat in the overstuffed burgundy armchairs in the Gryffindor common rooms around the wizard chess set. Harry was up in his room, hiding from Colin Creevey, who, even Hermione had to admit, was a bit relentless in trying to talk to Harry. There was a fine line between admiration and obsession, and Colin was showing it. One of my favorite things about Professor Lockhart is his hope for the future, you know, Hermione said as Ron contemplated his next move. He chewed noisily on jelly slugs from honeydukes. Harmony between magic and non-people? I think that's brilliant. Harmony between all magic and non-magic peoples? I think that's brilliant. Hermione, could you shut it for 1 minute about Lockhart? Ron said incredulously. Honestly, woman, you don't shut up about him. Hermione set her jaw. I do so. You don't, Ron said. You and all of the other girls going on and on about his hair and eyes and muscles. Blah. I do not go on about his looks, Ronald, Hermione said, her voice starting to rise. He is so much more than his looks. Just think about how much he has accomplished. Rubbish, Ron said. Knight to F6. He's a flake. He doesn't know anything. Face it, all you care about are his dreamy eyes or whatever it is you girls see in him. At his command, the king glided across the board. If he didn't know anything, how has he written so many books? They're rubbish too, Ron said. I think the only worthwhile book is the one about household pests. Gilderoy Lockhart's Guide to Household Pests, Hermione interjected. Yeah, that one. My mum loves that one. But everything else is complete rubbish, Ron said, sitting back in the chair and flicking his shiny copper hair out of his light blue eyes so he could stare at Hermione. And I should think someone as smart as you would think it rubbish as well, he said with a hint of challenge to his voice. Hermione sat straight up in a combination of anger, shock, and humbleness. A lot of thoughts instantly flew through her head. Ron questioning Lockhart's integrity was like a personal affront to Hermione. He was also calling her stupid for liking him, but he also said that she was smart in the same breath. Hermione didn't know how to think. The jumble of thoughts was one of the most uncomfortable feelings in the whole world for Hermione. It's your turn, Ron said. Queen to h4, Hermione said without really thinking. Ron leaned forward with eagerness. Rook to h4, he said gleefully. Hermione watched in horror as Ron's rook first spun and then tossed her queen off the board onto the floor. Without her queen, she hardly had a chance to beat Ron. Hermione studied the board, trying to quiet the thoughts in her head. She was desperately fighting the bubbling anxiety. The one thing she knew was that Ron wouldn't want to hear a litany of facts about Lockhart, though she didn't want him thinking she was being blinded by Lockhart's looks. No, there was much more to him. Ron was wrong, and she was right, as usual. There was no way she could be that shallow and blinded by Lockhart's beauty. Just like she was enamored with Maria's bravery and Finnegan's humor, she was blown away by Gilderoy's gallantry. Looks had nothing to do with it. As usual, Ronald, Hermione said, you have absolutely no idea what you're going off about. Oh yeah? Ron said. You're telling me you and all the girls don't go completely mad about his looks. Hermione's mind flashed back to that first day when they were washing off after herbology and blushed. That's not the only thing we talk about, Hermione said with a certainty in her voice. Ron, surprisingly, must have picked up on it because he didn't press the subject. They continued to play in silence for a bit longer until Ginny plopped down on the floor in front of Hermione. Oi, what do you want? Ron said. Nothing, Ginny said. Just sitting down. Do you have a problem with that? Yep, I have a problem with that. You're bothering me, Ron replied. How am I bothering you, Howler boy? Ginny said. I just sat down. Don't call me Howler boy, Ron said, his face flushing with anger. I can sit wherever I want and call you whatever I want to, Ginny retorted. Honestly, Ronald, what is your issue? Hermione took the side of her new friend. My issue is that she's ruining my concentration, Ron said through clenched teeth, and I don't want to be seen hanging out with a stupid first year. Oh, come off it, Ginny said. It's not like you have a reputation to speak of. You're just Harry Potter's friend. Sod off. Ron jumped up, nearly knocking the chessboard off the table. Ginny grinned. Ooh, struck a nerve, have I? At least I don't become a bloody fool whenever Harry's around. Ron spat back. He put on his best Ginny impersonation. Oh no, it's Harry. Better run away and go write his name over and over in my diary up in my room. Ginny's face faltered slightly. Hermione had learned last year that siblings, especially the Weasley siblings, fought all the time, but it was mostly in jest. She could tell, however, Ron's words had gone a bit too far, and Ginny may also have as well. Let's just get back to the chess game, she said, trying to cut the tension. Or do you give up, Ron? Because I'm perfectly fine with winning. Absolutely not, Ron said, turning his attention back to the game. Hermione slid a hand out and gave Ginny's arm a friendly squeeze. Ginny looked over and gave a half smile, but Hermione could still see the lingering blush on her cheeks. Saturday morning, Hermione went down to the great hall for breakfast and a little light reading before following through with her plan of spending the weekend in the library. She propped up Traveling with Trolls so she could use both hands to eat her marmalade and toast. She was so engrossed that she barely noticed Ron approaching until he sat down next to her. She looked up and realized he was alone. Where's Harry? Hermione caught a slight frown cross Ron's face. Oliver Wood busted into our room, dragged him off to Quidditch practice before dawn, he said, filling his plate. Quidditch was the Wizarding World sport equivalent to football that everyone at Hogwarts, except for Hermione it seemed, was obsessed with. She wasn't sure which part of his statement Ron was frowning at. The part where Oliver Wood, the Gryffindor team captain, came in so early, or the fact that Harry was the youngest Quidditch player in the history of Hogwarts. Usually, only students in their second year or older could play, but Harry was the exception last year. I can't believe it's starting already, Hermione mused. We've only just got done with the first week of school. I think Wood wants a leg up on the other houses, Ron said, his mouth full of sausages. Last year's final game nearly killed him. He doesn't like to lose. Hermione recalled Harry had been in the hospital wing for the last house game, leaving the team without a seeker. They recorded the worst score in 300 years. It was rumored Oliver Wood didn't stop crying until halfway through the summer holiday. Why don't you try out for the team, Ron? She asked. Second years are allowed to play, right? Right, Ron said. But they don't have any open positions. But wouldn't it make sense to have an alternate player so what happened last year doesn't happen again? Hermione asked. Ron cocked his head to the side, thinking it over. Never thought about that, Ron said. Hermione shook her head. It was such a simple concept. You should suggest it, she said. Ron's face perked up. You're right. I should, he said and grabbed a few pieces of toast. Come on, let's go. I didn't mean now. Oh, all right, Hermione said, throwing her book into her bag and grabbing her last piece of toast. She followed Ron down to the Quidditch pitch, though Harry and the rest of the Gryffindors were nowhere to be seen. Maybe they're just finished up, Ron said, taking a seat. Probably getting changed. I'll talk to Wood when they come out. Hermione just nodded. She didn't understand the urgency, but she didn't really care to understand it either. She pulled her book out and took a bite of her marmalade and toast. All right, Hermione, came a little mousy voice from behind her. Colin was sitting in some of the highest seats directly behind Hermione. Hey, Colin, how are you? She called over to him. Great, just waiting for Harry to come out, he said excitedly. You know this kid? Ron asked her with wide eyes. I met him in King's Cross Station, Hermione replied. Annoying little bugger, Ron said under his breath, so Colin couldn't hear. He's just curious, Hermione whispered back. He and Ginny should start a Harry club. They both can't get enough of him, Ron said bitterly. Ronald, that's not very nice. You really should be nicer to Ginny. Aren't you finished yet? Called Ron. At first, she thought he was talking to her, but then Hermione noticed Harry walking out of the changing rooms into the field. Haven't even started, said Harry. Wood's been teaching us new moves. They watched him mount his broomstick and kick at the ground, soaring up into the air. He soared right around the stadium and at full speed, racing Fred and George. As much as she didn't like Quidditch, Hermione had to admit that Harry was an excellent player. What's that funny clicking noise? Hermione heard Fred call as they hurtled around the corner. Hermione instantly knew what the clicks were without looking. Colin was standing precariously on the highest bench, taking picture after picture, the sound strangely magnified in the deserted stadium. Look this way, Harry, this way, he cried shrilly. Colin, cut it out, Hermione whispered as loudly as she could. She knew they weren't going to take too kindly to him taking pictures, but didn't want to startle Colin and cause him to fall. Hope he falls, Ron mumbled. Ronald, Hermione said. That's not very nice at all. Well, I didn't say get hurt. I just said fall, said Ron. It's still not very nice, Hermione said again, and then turned her attention back to Colin. Colin, she called a little louder. Colin, stop taking pictures. Oi, Ron bellowed. Colin tittered on the bench but caught himself just in time. The lady said stop taking pictures, and I say listen to her. What are they doing? Colin called back. And why are the Slytherins here? What? Ron shouted and looked across the pitch. Sure enough, most of the Gryffindors had landed and were standing off against a group of Slytherins on the other side of the pitch. Ron took off across the pitch with Hermione on his heels. She knew whatever happened wouldn't be good. Ron, don't get too upset, she said, but she knew he wasn't listening. She tried to catch up. What's happening? Ron asked Harry when they finally crossed the pitch. Why aren't you playing? And what's he doing here? He was looking at Malfoy, taking in his Slytherin Quidditch robes. I'm the new Slytherin Seeker, Weasley, said Malfoy, smuggling. Everyone's been admiring the brooms my father's bought our team. Ron gaped, open-mouthed, at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. Hermione could feel all of the anger toward Draco and his father bubbling to the surface. She tried to take a breath to calm herself, but it did nothing. "Good, aren't they?" said Malfoy smoothly. His voice was as slimy as his howls. "But perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get new brooms too. You could raffle for those clean sweep 5s. I expect the museum would bid for them." The Slytherin team howled with laughter. All Hermione could think about was how Draco and his father had made her feel, how the clerk had made her feel. The anger started to overflow. "At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in," said Hermione sharply. "They got in on pure talent." The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. "No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood," he spat. Hermione knew at once that Malfoy had said something horrible, because there was an instant uproar at his words. Flint, the Slytherin captain, had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George from jumping on him. One of the other Gryffindor players, Alicia, shrieked, "How dare you!" And Ron plunged his hand into his robes, pulled out his wand, yelling, "You'll pay for that, Malfoy!" and pointed it furiously under Flint's arm at Malfoy's face. It all happened in slow motion. A loud bang echoed around the stadium, and a jet of green light shot out of the wrong end of Ron's wand, hitting him in the stomach and sending him reeling backward onto the grass. "Ron, are you all right?" squealed Hermione. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he gave an almighty belch, and several slugs dribbled out of his mouth onto his lap. The Slytherin team was paralyzed with laughter. Flint was doubled up, hanging onto his new broomstick for support. Malfoy was on all fours, banging the ground with his fist. The Gryffindors were gathered round Ron, who kept belching large, glistening slugs. Nobody seems to want to touch him. "We'd better get him to Hagrid's. It's nearest," said Harry to Hermione, who nodded bravely. The pair of them pulled Ron up by the arms. Hermione felt horrible. She knew Ron had only been trying to defend her. "What happened, Harry? What happened? Is he ill? But you can cure him, can't you?" Colin had run down from his seat and was now dancing alongside them as they left the field. Ron gave a tremendous heave, and more slugs dribbled down his front. Hermione tried to shoo Colin away, but he wasn't paying any attention to her. "Oh," said Colin, fascinated and raising his camera. "Can you hold him still, Harry?" "Get out of the way, Colin," said Harry angrily. Hermione didn't blame Harry for snapping, but also didn't miss the hurt look on Colin's face as he stopped on his tracks. Hermione looked away and continued to support Ron out of the stadium, across the grounds towards the edge of the forest. "Nearly there, Ron," said Hermione, as the gamekeeper's cabin came into view. "You'll be all right in a minute. Almost there." They were within 20 feet of Hagrid's house when the front door opened, but it wasn't Hagrid who emerged. Gilderoy Lockhart, wearing robes of palest mauve today, came striding out. Hermione's heart fluttered. He'd surely be able to help. "Quick, behind here!" Harry hissed, dragging Ron behind a nearby bush. Hermione followed, somewhat reluctantly. She didn't understand why Harry wasn't as excited to see Lockhart as she was. "It's a simple matter if you knew what you're doing," Lockhart was saying loudly to Hagrid. "If you need help, you know where I am. I'll let you have a copy of my book. I'm surprised you haven't already got one. I'll sign one tonight and send it over. Well, goodbye," as he strode towards the castle. They waited until Lockhart was out of sight, then pulled Ron out of the bush and up to Hagrid's front door. Hermione knocked urgently. Hagrid appeared at once, looking very grumpy, but his expression brightened when he saw who it was. Been wondering when you'd come to see me. Come in, come in. Thought you might have been Professor Lockhart back again. Harry and Hermione supported Ron over the threshold into the one-roomed cabin, which had an enormous bed in one corner, a fire crackling merrily in the other. Hagrid didn't seem perturbed at Ron's problem in the least. Hermione, meanwhile, tried to diagnose the problem. She realized with dread that Ron had probably attempted to hex Draco with Slugulus eructu, the slug vomiting charm, and because his wand was broken, it had backfired. Better out than in, Hagrid chirped, plunking a large copper basin in front of him. Get them all up, Ron. I don't think there's anything to do except wait for it to stop, said Hermione, anxiously, watching Ron bend over the basin. That's a difficult curse to work at the best of times, but with a Bronco and wand. Hermione shook her head. Ron, unfortunately, was going to be in for a long and uncomfortable night. Hagrid was bustling around, making them tea. His boarhound Fang was slobbering over Harry. What did Lockhart want with you, Hagrid? Harry asked. Giving me advice on getting kelpies out of a well, growled Hagrid, moving a half-plucked rooster off his scrub table and setting down the teapot. Like I don't know. And banging on about some banshee he banished. If one word of it was true, I'll eat my kettle. Hermione couldn't believe Hagrid was bad-mouthing Professor Lockhart. I think you're being a bit unfair, she said with a high, strained voice. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought he was the best man for the job. He was the only man for the job, said Hagrid, offering them a plate of trickled toffee while Ron coughed squelchily into his basin. And I mean the only one. Getting very difficult to find anyone for the dark arts job. People aren't too keen to take it on, you see. They're starting to think it's jinxed. No one lasted long for a while now. So tell me, said Hagrid, jerking his head at Ron, who was he trying to curse? Malfoy called Hermione something. It must have been really bad because everyone went wild, Harry said. Hermione's stomach dropped to her toes. The full weight of what had happened finally hit her now that the stress and excitement of getting Ron to safety were gone. For the first time in her life, Hermione didn't want to know what the meaning of a word was. She just wanted to forget it and forget that it had ever happened. It was bad, said Ron hoarsely, emerging over the tabletop looking pale and sweaty. Malfoy called her Mudblood, Hagrid. Ron dived out of sight again as a fresh wave of slugs made their appearance. Hagrid looked outraged. He didn't, he growled at Hermione. He did, Hermione said sadly. But I don't know what it means. I could tell it was really rude, of course. It's about the most insulting thing he could think of, gasped Ron, coming back. Hermione figured that was the case, but to hear Ron confirm it was like a punch in the stomach. The same feelings she had at Flourish and Blotts came rushing back as Ron continued. Mudblood's a real foul name for someone who is muggle-born, you know, non-magic parents. There are some wizards, like Malfoy's family, who think they're better than everyone else because they're what people call pure blood. He gave a small burp, and a single slug fell into his outstretched hand. He threw it into the basin and continued. I mean, the rest of us know it doesn't make any difference at all. Look at Neville Longbottom. He's pure blood, and he can hardly stand a cauldron the right way up. And they haven't invented a spell our Hermione can't too, said Hagrid proudly, making Hermione go a brilliant shade of magenta. She was simply overwhelmed with emotions. It's a disgusting thing to call someone, said Ron, wiping his sweat brow with a shaking hand. Dirty blood, see, common blood. It's ridiculous. Most wizards these days are half-blood anyway. If we hadn't married muggles, we'd have died out. He retched and ducked out of sight again. Well, I don't blame you for trying to curse him, Ron, said Hagrid loudly over the thuds of more slugs hitting the basin. But maybe it was a good thing your one backfired. Expect Lucius Malfoy would have come marching up to school if you'd cursed his son. At least you're not in trouble, Harry, said Hagrid abruptly, as though struck by a sudden thought. Got a bone to pick with you. I've heard you've been giving out signed photos. How come I haven't got one? I haven't been giving out signed photos, Harry said hotly. If Lockhart's still spreading that around. But then he saw that Hagrid was laughing. I'm only joking, he said, patting Harry genially on the back and sending him face first into the table. I knew you hadn't really. I told Lockhart you didn't need to. You're more famous than him without trying. Bet he didn't like that, said Harry, sitting up and rubbing his chin. Don't think he did, said Hagrid, his eyes twinkly. And then I told him I'd never read one of his books, and he decided to go. Trickle toffee, Ron? He added as Ron reappeared. No, thanks, said Ron weakly. Better not risk it. Come and see what I've been growing, said Hagrid, as Harry and Hermione finished the last of their tea. In the small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's house were a dozen of the largest pumpkins Harry had ever seen. Each was the size of a large boulder. Getting on well, aren't they? Said Hagrid happily. For the Halloween feast. Should be big enough by then. What have you been feeding them? Said Harry. Hagrid looked over his shoulder to check that they were alone. Well, I've been giving them, a bit of help. An engorgement charm, I suppose, said Hermione, halfway between disapproval and amusement. She knew the Hogwarts groundskeeper had been expelled when he was a student and forbidden to do magic. However, she had been sure he snuck in some spells here and there, and this was definitely an example of it. Instead of chastising him, however, Hermione returned the compliment he gave her. Well, you've done a really good job on them. That's what your little sister said, Hagrid said, nodding at Ron. Met her just yesterday. Hagrid looked sideways at Harry, his beard twitching. Said she was just looking around the grounds, but I reckon she was hoping she might run into someone else at my house. He winked at Harry. If you ask me, she wouldn't say no to a signed... Oh, shut up, said Harry. Ron snorted with laughter, and the ground was sprayed with slugs. Hermione sighed. She'd have to tell Ginny to play it a bit cooler. Oh, watch it! Hagrid roared, pulling Ron away from his precious pumpkins. They said goodbye to Hagrid and walked back to the castle. Ron hiccoughing occasionally, but only bringing up 2 very small slugs. Hermione was pleased Ron was getting better, but the less she worried about Ron, the more she thought about the word Mudblood and the meaning behind it. Then, without warning, a memory popped into her head. The sorting hat. Those they call mud. Hermione tried to shake it off. It was just too much to think of right now. They had barely set foot in the cool entrance hall when a voice rang out. There you are, Potter, Weasley. Professor McGonagall was walking towards them, looking stern. You will both do your detentions this evening. What are we doing, Professor? Said Ron, nervously suppressing a burp. You will be polishing the silver in the trophy room with Mr. Filch, said Professor McGonagall. And no magic, Weasley. Elbow grease. Ron gulped. Argus Filch, the caretaker, was loaded by every student in the school. Hermione tried to suppress a grin. Break the rules and pay the consequences. And you, Potter, you will be helping Professor Lockhart answer his fan mail, said Professor McGonagall. Hermione gasped in jealousy. Oh no! Professor, can't I go to the trophy room too? Said Harry. Certainly not, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrows. Professor Lockhart requested you particularly. 8 o'clock sharp, both of you. Harry and Ron slumped into the great hall in states of deepest gloom. Hermione behind them, wearing a well, you did break school rules sort of expression. She did not pity them. Filch will have me there all night, said Ron heavily. No magic. There must be about 100 cups in that room. I'm no good at muggle cleaning. I'd swap any time, said Harry hollowly. I've had loads of practice with the Dursleys. Answering Lockhart's fan mail, he'll be a nightmare. I do not know what you're talking about, Hermione said. Helping Lockhart with his letters is clearly the better punishment. In fact, I'd argue it's too good for detention. Of course that's what you think, Ron sneered. What does that mean? Hermione challenged him. You know exactly what that means, Ron said. You're impossible, Ronald Weasley, Hermione exclaimed and stormed out of the great hall towards the library, where she should have been all along. Thank you very much. Hermione made it to the Hogwarts library in record time, twisting and turning through the ancient corridors filled with students, professors, and ghosts. The musty smell of leather, parchment, and dust greeted her like an old friend. The scent had an immediate calming effect on her. As she breathed it in, her anxiety started to subside. No word vomit this time. Hermione let Professor Lockhart's magnificent words consume her brain within the calming bookshelves, so no thought could be had for the Sorting Hat and those they call mud. She stayed there rereading Magical Me for most of the day into the late evening before going to bed. She was in no mood to talk to anyone, especially with Ron and Harry after their detentions. The next morning, after dreaming of a particularly terrifying mud-eating monster, Hermione grabbed a quick bite to eat in the early dawn and returned to the library. Back in a small nook in the charms section, Hermione found her favorite desk and plopped down. With it being just the first week of school, Hermione found herself mostly alone in the library, just as she had the day before. She could hear another student in the next section rifling the pages of an old book, but Hermione paid them no attention. She pulled out all of her Gilderoy Lockhart books and placed them on the desk in front of her to make it easier to pick what to read next. She tried to be as quiet as possible, but one of the books knocked off the table. The loud crash seemed to be magnified in the enormous library. Hermione, came a voice from the other side of the stacks. Yes, Hermione said hesitantly. Parvati popped her head round the corner of the shelves. Hey, how did you know it was me? Hermione asked. Who else would be in the library during the first week of school? Parvati laughed. That's fair, Hermione said with a smile. But that doesn't explain why you're here. Parvati's smile faltered a bit. I was just looking something up, she said mysteriously. Oh, what are you looking up? Maybe I can help? No, I wouldn't want to bother you, Parvati said. It's no bother, really, assured Hermione. Besides, I feel as though we haven't had a good chance to talk since we've been together, since we've been back. Lavender hasn't left your side for a minute. Yeah, Parvati said. We wrote letters to each other this summer too, and I guess we got a bit closer. Hermione felt slightly miffed at the idea Parvati and Lavender were becoming better friends, and that Parvati had someone else to write to this summer, but tried to brush it aside. She had, of course, become friends with Ginny just the same way. That's nice, Hermione said with a forced smile. So what do you need help with? Parvati stared at Hermione, seemingly trying to decide. You sure you won't make fun of me? she said finally. Of course not. Even if you think what I'm doing is silly, Parvati continued. I promise, Hermione said. Okay, Parvati said and looked round to make sure they were alone. She took a few steps into the charms section and sat across from Hermione. I'm trying to look up a love spell. Oh, for who? Hermione said, trying to quiet the need to blurt out all of the reasons a love spell was not a good idea, and took a deep breath instead. Justin Finch Fletchley, Parvati said in a squeaky voice. The Hufflepuff? Hermione asked in surprise. Yeah, you know him? Yes, I met him in herbology, Hermione said. You don't like him too, do you? Parvati asked, sounding nervous. What? No, Hermione stammered. I mean, yes, I like him, I guess, but not like that. I just think he's nice, or at least that's how he seems. Good. I mean, yes, he is, Parvati said. I only asked because Lavender likes him too, and yeah. Why do you need a love spell, though? Well, Lavender is so much prettier than I am, Parvati sighed. I need an advantage. Looks don't matter, Parvati, Hermione exclaimed. Says the girl who swoons with the rest of us every time Professor Lockhart enters the room. Parvati giggled. I do not, Hermione said. Oh, you do so, Parvati said, but that's okay, we all do it. He's dreamy. He's just as brave as he's dreamy, Hermione argued. Sure, that's just icing on the cake, though, Parvati said with a wink. You can't sit here and tell me that you'd rather read his books than look into those deep blue eyes. Hermione blushed. She didn't want to prove Ron right, but she couldn't help herself. Can I do both? The girls erupted into laughter, but Hermione forced herself to stop after a few seconds. They were still in the library, after all. Hermione chose her next words carefully. She still had to convey how a love potion was a horrible idea without ruining the fun they were having. If you use a love potion, how am I going to learn how to talk to boys and flirt? She said. You're my social model. I need to learn how to talk to people. Remember how horribly it went with Finn, the postman? Yeah, but nothing. How about I will help you with a love potion after you try to talk to him the normal way first? Parvati thought a moment on it before shaking her head and chuckling. Fine. But don't think you were being clever there, Hermione. I know exactly what you're doing. Parvati gave Hermione a sly grin. You are much smarter than you give yourself credit for. Do you know that? Hermione said. Tell that to Padma, Parvati said with a laugh. Padma was Parvati's twin sister who was in Ravenclaw. The sisters were extremely competitive, especially when it came to their studies. You know, you've come a long way since last year, Hermione. What do you mean? Well, last year, to be honest, you were a social nightmare. But this year, you seem more understanding, less judgmental. You don't just blurt out everything in your brain. It's nice. Hermione blushed as Parvati continued. So yeah, I can be your social model for now, but you don't really need me anymore. You're finding your place here in the wizarding world. After chatting a bit more with Parvati in the library, Hermione settled in for her 9th reread of Travels with Trolls. She could feel her mind slipping back to the Sorting Hat, and she didn't want to deal with it. She was on pace to beat her time from her 8th reread, but was interrupted by Ron and Harry towards the end of the 52nd chapter. Hermione, there you are, Ron called loudly. As they turned the corner into her little nook. Shh, Hermione whispered. This is a library, Ronald. Right, sorry, Ron said, but made more noise than an elephant in a china shop as he pulled out a chair and sat down. We've been looking for you all over, Harry said quietly. I told him you'd be here in the charms section, Ron said proudly with a grin. Keep your voice down, Hermione said. But it didn't escape her that Ron knew her well enough to know where she liked to go in the library. So you found me. What do you want? I wanted to tell you what happened last night, Harry said urgently under his breath. He leaned in. So I was in Lockhart's office signing loads of photos for him when I heard this deep whisper saying, "Come to me. Let me rip and tear and kill you," or something like that. But Lockhart said he didn't hear it. But I swear I heard it, Hermione, clear as anything. Hermione gasped. What do you think it was? I have no idea, Harry said. But it can't be good, right? Well, no, of course not, Hermione said, trying to think. Any kind of mysterious voice threatening to kill you is usually not a good thing. That's what I thought too, Ron said in his full voice. He was clearly trying to make up for what he had said the day before by being nice to Hermione. She knew his games, and she wasn't in the mood to play them. It's kind of obvious, Ronald, Hermione retorted and turned back to Harry. Where did the voice seem to be coming from? Did you recognize it at all? Harry paused for a moment to think back. It definitely seemed to be coming from somewhere just outside the room. I don't know, maybe not. It was close but far away. And no, I didn't recognize it. It was really deep and raspy. Hermione had a sinking thought. Like you know who? She whispered, afraid of the answer. No, not really, Harry said, thinking hard. But I can't be sure. Hermione's heart dropped, and a ball of anxiety replaced it, burning in her chest. Not again.